Yeah, sure. Testing. Are we good? Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. There. Remove it. Let me just check. Yes. Testing. It's on.
Testing 1. Testing 1, 2.
Yes.
Testing. Hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello.
Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3.
Testing 1, 2.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Is it okay?
Hello. Hello, 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 hello. Can you test yours?
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
One. Hello, hello.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing. Now.
Yeah, just a Thank you.
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inshallah. Inshallah we'll get started. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir la'in ar-rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Salatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen wa ala ahli bayti at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters here and online, inshallah. We want to continue, inshaAllah, with a tafsir of the Holy Quran, al-Majid wal-Furqan al-Hamid, and building on an understanding of the holy text of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the holy book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, as we mentioned, our goal is to try to understand some of the tools, some of the skill sets that we can use to analyze the Quran al-Majid wal-Furqan al-Hamid, and also understand its historical context and how it came about, what was the environment in which it emerged, and what are basically the secrets that lie within the Quran as taught to us by the holy guides, that is the Prophet and his itra, that is his holy immaculate family. And I mentioned in subsequent nights, and I will continue to relate, you will find commonalities, parallels, overlaps between the conversations that we have in the nightly majlis and this one. There are some unique items that will be here only, and there are some unique items that will be there only, and also you'll find some cross overlap. But I do ensure, inshallah, that by the end, if you are able to attend both, your understanding and ma'rifah, inshallah, will be much further. Because the Quran is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we recite one verse of the Quran, the sawab and the ajr that we get from it is tenfold at a minimum, if not more, according to some riwayat. So the more and more you get entrenched with the Quran, the more and more it gives. That is the beauty of the Quran. The more you give it, the more time you give it, the more it gives back to you in your life. And that's why we mentioned last time as well that you will get not only benefits religiously and Islamically, but you will also get benefits from understanding the Quran that are what we would call secular in the modern world, that are not necessarily just religious. You will get insights on history, on economics, and also human nature, the fitrah of insan. And by this you'll be able to see the world more clearly and understand your priorities more easily. And by that virtue, you'll also learn other skill sets. For example, what? Argumentation. You will learn how to make a convincing argument. This is something that's not necessarily religious only. You'll know how to convince someone based on dalil and istidlal. Because remember, in the early parts of the Quran, the people who are being addressed in many of the Makki surahs or the Makki chapters of the Quran are the infidels, as they would call in modern day. They were the non-Muslims, the people of Ayyam Jahiliyyah. And so Allah made a compelling argument to them where they understood and said, this is not, for example, many of them, not all of them, that this is not the works of Rasulullah. This is not a man-made book. Rather, this is a divine book. And so how did Allah convince these people? To not only convince in that era and that time, also in our era. For example, there are many famous translations of the Quran al-Majid wal Furqan al-Hamid in the last 100, 200, 300 years and throughout time since Rasulullah's era. For example, one famous translation is by Muhammad Marmaduke Pickthall. You may have heard of this famous translation. He was a man who was a Christian man who became a Muslim by understanding that this book, for example, is not something that could be written by an ordinary individual. This is someone living in the last few hundred years, last 100 years. Even there's examples of people who were followers of the Hindu faith, who were academics of the Arabic language, who studied Arabic and studied the Quran and said this is something that's not from a human. That is what you'll get, inshallah, from the Quran. That's the first level. I want to start and build and continue on this idea of, for example, Surah Al-Fatiha and Surah Al-Hamd. We've been discussing in the main lecture Surah Yasin, which is the heart of the Quran. If you want to understand this, there's a few chapters of the Quran that are extremely powerful. Surah Fatiha, of course, is one of them. Surah Yasin is one of them, for example. And Surah Ikhlas is another one, Surah Tawheed. These are very powerful chapters of the Quran, and the merit of them is tremendous, for example. And I'll mention this, inshallah, maybe later, inshallah, for others to benefit as well. But Surah Fatiha is a preview for you, inshallah, who are watching online and here. When you recite Surah Fatiha in riwayat, it says you get 2/3 of completion of the Quran. So about 67% of the Quran you've completed if you recite Surah Fatiha, in terms of sawab, in terms of ajr. If you then recite Surah Ikhlas, you get 1/3. You combine the two, Surah Fatiha and Surah Ikhlas, Surah Tawheed together, you complete the thawab of one entire chapter of the Holy Quran. Now as a preview, Yasin you get much more. Inshallah we'll talk about how much you get with Yasin, one recitation of that. But when we come to this, if Yasin is the heart, Fatiha is no less. Fatiha is the condensed, the most important element. Maybe you can argue it's the arteries that are going into the heart, for example. That is what you can give the example of Surah Fatiha. Not the entire heart maybe, but the essence, everything is distilled in Surah Fatiha. That's how important it is. That's why no salah is complete without Surah Fatiha. Now, one important element that I want to come to here is the first chapter of this, the first ayah of this chapter, that is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. According to all of our ulama, the Shia school of thought, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is a part of the surah itself. According to our brothers in Ahl Sunnah, who are not, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. According to our brothers in Ahl Sunnah, Bismillah, there's a difference of opinion. For example, they have the four main schools of thought. Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, for example, and Hanafi. Abu Hanifa, who is the predominant, the followers of Abu Hanifa, who was a student of Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, he has the predominant followership amongst Ahl Sunnah. About 34 to 40% of the Sunni community are followers of Abu Hanifa. You will find them in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and other places as well. All of them do not believe that it's part of Bismillah. The only one who's from Ahl Sunnah who believes that Bismillah is part of Surah Fatiha is Imam Shafi'i. Imam Shafi'i is someone who was a Ahl Sunnah scholar, but he had a lot of love for the Ahlul Bayt, at least apparently. For example, there's numerous poetry of Imam Shafi'i in honor of Imam Ali, where, for example, he writes in a qasida about Imam Ali, لَوْ أَنَّ الْمُرْتَضَى يُبْدِي مَحَلَّا. And he goes on and says that if Ali, I'm condensing, if Ali had not hidden his attributes, if Ali had not hidden his fada'il, then people would have said that he is God and things of this nature. This is Imam Shafi'i saying this. Imam Shafi'i says this is part of Bismillah. Imam Shafi'i is also the same person, by the way, who said that I did not find any of my problems except the solution to them were at the gateway of Musa al-Kadhim. That is our seventh Imam. This is the respect that some of the scholars of the past had for the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Now, the question I want to come at is this, with respect to Fatiha in particular, Surah Al-Hamd. Now, Surah Al-Hamd in particular, Surah Al-Fatiha, now you have to understand this. There's two types of revelations in the Quran, for my dear audience everywhere. There's the chronological revelation, and then there's the tartibi revelation as we have in the Quran. For example, right now we have Surah Fatiha in the beginning, then Surah Baqarah, then Surah Al Imran, and so on and so forth. But is that the chronological revelation? No, of course that's not the answer. There's some ayat that were revealed earlier, some different and some not. So for example, Surah Alaq, it's understood that Surah Alaq was the first in terms of revelation. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق. In terms of the first verse of Revelation, this is the first one. Now, but why is Surah Fatiha at the beginning? Now there's a debate amongst the ulama in Shia school of thought, Sunni school of thought, everyone has this debate that for example, why were certain verses and not? And is the tartib that we have, who did this tartib? Who made this order that we have of Surah Fatiha first, and for example, for the other verses, for example, Surah Baqarah, the chapter of Baqarah, Ali Imran, all of these, this tartib. Because if you understand the narrations, you have the idea that there's Makki verses and Madani. And this is going to be very important in both conversations, here and there, inshallah. There are Makki and Madani. One mistake that people make when they talk about Makki and Madani is we think it's just if it's revealed in Makkah, or just if it's revealed in Medina. No. As a preview, Makki and Madani has to do with Hijrah. The marker is Hijrah, when Rasulullah migrated from Makkah to Medina. So it has to do with a period of time. It doesn't have to do with where it was revealed. Because for example, as just one example, the last verses or Fath Makkah, Rasulullah is in Makkah. It happened in the 8th year of Hijrah. He left from Medina and they went towards Makkah to conquer Makkah. They're in Makkah, but the verses are revealed there, for example. Or numerous examples, Hajjatul Wida is in Makkah, but it's part of the Madani period. So this is something that's very important to note. Now you will find many of the Makki surahs, the 13 years in Makkah, where Rasulullah is in Makkah in the first 13 years, many of those chapters came, obviously they came in the first 13 years of the Wahy, of the revelation of Rasulullah. But why is it that most of the Makki chapters, for example, the 30th juz, the 30th sipara as we would call it, or para, majority of those chapters are all Makki. But why are they at the end? They should be at the beginning, if it's in terms of revelation of tartib, in terms of when it was revealed. But there is a hikmah. Our ulama, for example, Sayyid Al-Khou'i, for example, Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi, they say that this tartib that we have today in terms of Surah Fatiha, Surah Baqarah, Surah Al Imran, all the way down, and ending with the chapters at the end of the 30th Sipara, these are all by Allah. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran himself has said that we have revealed it and we are the protectors. Hafidhun, we are the protectors of the Quran. There's another argument that comes, oh sorry, is there a question? What are the total number of chapters? Yes, so in terms of the question is, what are the total number of chapters, for example, or Makki and Madani? According to the ulama, there's 86 of the surahs or chapters of the Quran are Makki, for example, are of the Makki period, the first 13 years of revelation. According to that means if you do the mathematics, the rest of that remains is 28. 28 are Madani. So 86 plus 28 should equal 114. 114 chapters in total. Now, I should clarify this also. There's a debate amongst the ulama. There are 20 surahs that are of the Madani period that are guaranteed Madani, of that. And there are 82 that are guaranteed Makki. If you add 20 and 82, you get 102. 102 of them we guaranteed know where they are from, Makki period or Madani period. 12 chapters, there's a debate. There's a debate about whether it's Makki or Madani. Because as you know, some chapters of if a surah, a chapter of the Quran is Makki or Madani, there may be, in a Makki chapter, there may be some verses that are Madani. It's possible. For example, I'll give you an example that will help you in the lecture tonight. Tonight, in Surah Yasin, there's 83 verses. Surah Yasin is a Makki chapter. Salamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Surah Yasin is a Makki chapter. It was revealed in Mecca. In the Makki period, I should say. But one verse of it is from Medina. It's a Madani verse. So the answer to that, 86 of them are from the Makki period, the first 13 years. And 28 of them are from the period of Medina, or the Madani period. But there's a debate about 12 of them, 20 definitely Madani, and 82 definitely Makki. But again, the Makki Madani is not based on whether they were revealed in Mecca or whether they were revealed in Medina, not necessarily. It's based on were they before Hijrah or after Hijrah. The same way as, for example, our calendar goes before Christ or Anno Domino, after death, or the same way. Before Hijrah or after Hijrah. Our Islamic calendar is based on Hijrah. So Makki and Madani depends on the basis of where it was revealed in terms of the time period. That's the most important thing, inshallah. I hope that helps, inshallah. Very good. So may Allah bless all of you, inshallah. And this idea of Surah Al-Hamd and Surah Al-Fatiha. Now, We know that in the Quran al-Majid wal Furqan al-Hamid, we have riwayat from the Ahlul Bayt that there is la salata illa bi Fatiha. That is, there is no prayer, there is no namaz or salah without Fatiha. You cannot have that. Now, this is one thing, one data point I'm giving you. This next data point that I'm giving you, inshallah, is that one of the first ahkam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Badahir, gave the Prophet after the announcement of prophethood, after the ba'that of Rasulullah at the age of 40, when he announced his prophethood, right at the beginning was namaz. Right at the beginning was salah. Other ibadat and worship came later, for example. And then as time progressed, other things were added. But the first thing, or one of the first things that were added at the very beginning was namaz and salat. But now keep these things in mind. And as you know, of course, the Bayt al-Maqdas or the Masjid al-Aqsa was the first qibla, and then the qibla was also changed as well, as you know. Now, keeping all of these things in mind, if we know that the first ibadah, or one of the first ibadat that was prescribed to Rasulullah was namaz and salah, of course, Rasulullah was praying from before, but for the Muslim community. And la salata illa bi Fatiha. Now I want to give you the third data point. The third data point was exactly what we mentioned just a few moments ago. What was the first verse in terms of the revelation? Was it Surah Fatiha? No. The first verse in terms of revelation was actually Surah Iqra. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. So now comes the question, which is interesting at the fourth level. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, khalaq al-insana min alaq, Iqra wa rabbuka al-akram, read in the name of your Lord. And then Allah is telling him to pray to him, and then we know, la salata illa bi Fatiha. Then the question emerges, then what is the connection? What is Rasulullah to recite? Because what Rasulullah is supposed to recite, he's supposed to tell us as well. This is where the ulama have argued, a very interesting argument, that if you compare the first 5 ayat of Surah Alaq to the chapter of Surah Al-Fatiha, you get your answer. That is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, based on Surah Alaq, is telling the beloved Prophet to recite Surah Fatiha's verses and chapters. And that gives us some insight into this concept of the revelation and when it was revealed. Now there's another interesting question that I want to share with you. Is, as you know, and we'll come to this in Laylatul Qadr and things of this nature, was the Quran revealed in one moment, or was the Quran revealed over 23 years? For those of you who've been listening to some of the lectures in the past, at least from me, you would know their answer to this. Because, as we know, the Quran was revealed in Laylatul Qadr. But hold on a second, if the Quran was revealed in Laylatul Qadr, then why is it that we have hundreds of riwayat from the time period of Rasulullah, that saying Rasulullah would stop and wahi would descend, and people would see sweat on his forehead, and they would say, for example, Ya Rasulullah, what just happened? He said, I just had a wahi, or an ayah came to me, or a chapter came to me, or things of this nature. So how is it that we at once have a gradual revelation, and at the same time we also have an instantaneous revelation? Instantaneous meaning that in Laylatul Qadr. And according to the ulama, the answer to this is very clear. That in Laylatul Qadr, the Quran was revealed from Baytul Ma'mur to the ground, to earth, to our realm. Baytul Ma'mur is what? Baytul Ma'mur, our Kaaba that we have in Mecca, is a replica, according to the ulama. Replica of what? It's a replica. Directly above it, it goes to the Arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there is the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Arsh called Baytul Ma'mur. That Baytul Ma'mur, the angels do tawaf around it. The angels do circumambulation around it. That is when the holy book was descended in one instant, Baytul Ma'mur. But in the 23-year period, it was gradually revealed. Now comes the interesting question. The interesting question here is this. If Rasulullah is getting these chapters one by one, then is it possible that these chapters that we've gotten, are they from the tartib of Rasulullah, or have they been given by Rasulullah and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately, or did we kind of create these chapters? So this is an interesting conversation. We have to understand a few things. There's some terms that we use with respect to the Quran. For example, we use terms about juz or sipara, 30 of them, for example. There are 30 juz or 30 sipara. Is there anything like this found in Or for example, you have arkan, for example, you have rukun, for example, and you have manzil. There are different ways that people have divided. And you'll find, for example, some people have tried to divide the Quran in 7, so they can finish it in 7 days. These are also not found. But there are a few things that are definitely found and 100% authentic. For example, what? For example, surah, or the jam'a, or the plural of it is surah. Surah is definitely something that is Islamic, and part of what the Ahlul Bayt have said, that these divisions have happened. Ayat, the verses, that is something that's definitely part of the system of the Ahlul Bayt, and what Allah wanted, these have been made into ayat, that into verses. That's definitely there. Now the question comes, when an ayah came, such as let's say one verse came, for example, in Surah Baqarah, for example. Now, if it came in Surah Baqarah, and all of Surah Baqarah has not been revealed for the Muslims, so does it mean that there is something such as Surah Baqarah or not? And the ulama argument and say about this, that yes, there is. This is an interesting dalil that someone has given. They give istidlal. That yes, it is that the ayah, the chapters were already there in their presence. How? The way that they were already in their presence is because Rasulullah would tell the fada'il of the chapter before. For example, as I mentioned to you, if you recite Surah Fatiha, you get 2/3 of completing the whole Quran sawab. Or for example, if you recite Surah Yasin, you get 12 Quran completion sawab. This is in the riwayat. So if the chapter has not fully been revealed, but Rasulullah is saying that this is the ajr and the sawab that you will get of it, that gives us indication that he already in his mind has the answers to what that is, what the whole chapter will be. So for us it's very clear. This tartib that we have, the setup of the Quran as we have it, it is from the Ahlul Bayt, it's been protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is something accurate for us to follow. When we come to this, another important element of this to understand is, again with respect to the Makki and Madani period, you will focus and you will understand, and I will repeat this, and the more we understand this, it will help inshallah. Is Makki predominantly, the early chapters in the Makki period were dealing with usuluddin. That is the roots of religion, Tawheed, Adalat, Nabuwat, Imamat and Qayamat, and these concepts. With respect to the later chapters or the Madani period, you find, for example, in Medina, you'll find, for example, they were mostly dealing with, although there are exceptions, but it was mostly dealing with ahkam, namaz, roza, hajj, zakat, khums, and these things. That's why, for example, Surah Baqarah and Surah Al Imran, these longer chapters are dealing with the actions that we have to fulfill. And these are part of predominantly the Madani period. Why? Because at the beginning Rasulullah was just asking through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah was asking through Rasulullah that look, just believe. Stop the idolatry to the Ayyam Jahiliyyah, the pagans. He was saying just stop your idolatry. You're making these gods out of clay with your own hands. You can break them with your own hands. These are not your God. The God is the one who created the heavens and the earth. That is Allah, where we said Al-Ilah, for example. That's where that comes from. And this is very important for us to understand, because if we don't understand this, then if we understand this, we'll understand more and more of how the Quran is structured in terms of the length of its chapters and verses. Because if you don't believe, then what's the point of the ahkam? That's why the analogy is used by the ulama of the roots of religion and the branches. We live in Florida. I know many of you may remember when the hurricanes hit in Florida, in the early ones, like in the past couple of decades. You sometimes saw palm trees go all the way across the way. They were uprooted. A palm tree typically is very tall. But oftentimes, for example, the roots may not be very deep. And sometimes you may see a shrub that's very short in terms of its appearance, badahir, but underneath it has many roots that go very far. No matter how strong the wind is, it won't go anywhere. So what's the analogy? The analogy is this. I know even if you go to Universal and some of these places, you'll find these trees that are bent, totally bent horizontally. They're palm trees. They got them when the hurricanes like Charlie and them came in Florida. And the idea was the wind was so strong, it just completely eradicated and uplifted some palm trees, and some it just bent them permanently. The idea is if your roots are strong, if your roots, that is the usul in your belief system, the result of that should be that your ahkam and your namaz, roza, hajj, zakat should also be strong. So no matter how strong the wind comes, you don't blow away from your deen and your iman. Now what often happens, if you have very strong namaz, roja, hajj, zakat, khums, these things, that's very good also. But if your belief and your usuluddin is not strong, it just becomes like the hurricane. A wind of hurricane comes and then you get blown away. So the real essence is to have usuluddin and furuddin together. And that's really what the Quran helps us to bring us. The final thing that I want to mention as we conclude about Surah Fatiha is a very interesting thing between Muslims and Christians. In Christianity, our Christian brethren have this concept of the Lord's Prayer. And many people have drawn this analogy between the Christian Lord's Prayer and said Islam's equivalent of the Lord's Prayer is Surah Al-Fatiha with respect to its blessed in details. And inshallah I will continue that another time, life permitting. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdu lillahi rabbil alameen. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.